Initiative, a correspondent for the Daily Beast and a columnist for Tablet Magazine, and Miriam Elder, foreign editor for BuzzFeed. She lived in Russia for seven years, a Moscow correspondent for The Guardian. James, you had a famous run-in on RT TV quite a while ago, which brought you to this program for the first time. I really want to get your reaction to what Abby Martin had to say.
Yeah, I think this is a form of really managed or controlled dissent. You know, there are real Democrats and oppositionists in Russia, like Alexei Navalny, who you showed earlier. Those people tend to be beaten up and thrown in jail. And then you have sort of the official or puppet opposition. And these are, you know, parties and politicians who are paid and sponsored by the Kremlin. That's what Abby Martin is. She cashes checks from Vladimir Putin. So she spends 60 seconds voicing her disagreement with Russian behavior in Ukraine. That doesn't counter what she does every day on her show, which is spout Kremlin propaganda. And not just Kremlin propaganda, but this woman, we need to be clear, is an out-and-out lunatic. She's a conspiracy theorist. She's a 9/11 truther. She thinks that water fluoridation is a government conspiracy, which the last time you heard that was probably from the John Birch Society. She's compared Israel to Nazi Germany. So you know, to portray her some sort of brave, truth-telling hero is really inaccurate. And all that's going to happen now is that RT is going to be able to, you know, hold up and dangle this little moment of pseudo dissent and say, look, we're a legitimate news network. We have differing points of view. And that's really not the case for anyone who watches RT. And
Abby Martin tweeted today after her network said that she was going to the epicenter. Abby Martin tweeted, "I am not going to Crimea, despite the statement RT has made. Please update accordingly," she was saying. Miriam, just to clarify on RT, it's not actually seen in Russia, right? Isn't this for foreign? It's a Russian network news production in the English language for foreign consumption. So no one in Russia actually saw her do that on TV?
Yeah, that's precisely right. Russia today was...
yeah, I mean, you know, that's where, if you're the Kremlin, that's where you want the dissent to be, on TV that no one in Russia can see.
Well, exactly. And I think, like, if you look at the way that the Russian government controls its media, it's really easy to understand this move as being honest or not honest. Russia canceled its live streaming of the Oscars the other night at the last minute, and it's understood from the journalists within precisely because they were scared of things like Jared Leto did, which was speak up for the protesters in Ukraine. And when it was aired the other day, they cut it out. So to think that this kind of explosion of dissent came out of nowhere is a little hard to believe.
James, you've spent time there. What is your sense about how we could now get at what's going on within the Russian population? What are they consuming by way of information about this? How much dissent is there to that information that they're consuming? Do we run polls there regularly? I mean, if this kind of situation was happening in the United States, there'd be a New York Times poll by now indicating, you know, what we feel about what's happening in our neighboring country.
Yeah.
How do we get at what's going on there inside Russia?
Yeah, I don't doubt that most Russians probably support what the government is doing right now, but you have to understand that practically all of the media, television, where most Russians get their news, is state-controlled. They're really only independent news sources. You have maybe a handful of newspapers, some independent websites, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the BBC, but the penetration of those sorts of media is not very high. So unfortunately, it's very difficult for the average Russian to really understand what's going on in their world, because they're basically getting, in Russian, what you see on RT, which is basically lies and propaganda.
But Miriam, what about internet access for the more kind of alert dissenters who know where to look around the world for other sources of information?
Yeah, it's incredibly lively, and I think that Jamie's right when it comes to sort of the older population in Russia who does get most of their news from state-controlled television, but kids there are on the internet all the time. And if you look at the main discussions on Twitter, on Facebook, on the Russian version of Facebook called Vkontakte, it's incredibly lively. There's tons of dissent, and that sphere is really sort of owned by the dissenters. And I think a really interesting thing now is going to be to see what the Kremlin does with the internet, precisely to clamp down on that kind of dissent.
To both of you, James, Miriam, James first, would you anticipate that dissent could bubble up to the level on this that we might see some kind of external protests in Moscow or elsewhere?
Well, I believe there was a small protest with a couple of hundred people protesting the action, which brought back memories of 1968, when Russians bravely protested the invasion of Czechoslovakia. And like then, this protest was broken up. People were beaten and carted off to jail. And there have been much bigger protests in recent Russian history with tens of thousands of people that were also broken up in such a way. So it's certainly possible. There obviously are Russians who are brave enough to go out and withstand the police forces, and I think that we in the West need to do everything we can to stand with them.
Now, Miriam, if you listened to Putin's press conference today, he said a lot of perfectly reasonable sounding things that if you're a Russian with very limited news access would sound very reasonable to you, that this was a violent overthrow of a government, that they violated the Constitution of the Ukraine, that there is no leader there for him to deal with. The thing that sounded most fanciful and was probably hard for a lot of people to believe is, no, those aren't Russian troops. They're just local people. But most of it, he said, you know, Yanukovych did a bad job, wouldn't get reelected. I told him he wouldn't get reelected. There's plenty of what he was saying. I want to be fair to the Russian people who are consuming this in that controlled news environment, that we're not saying that if you're buying the Putin view of this, you know, that's just, you're just being dumb. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which he presents this that can sound reasonable if you hear nothing else.
Absolutely, and this has been one of the most amazing things of the Putin project since he's come to power. He creates this kind of alternate reality. At first he did it domestically. When you are in Russia around election time, it's incredible. The talk about democracy, the posters on the streets, you know, the people out at rallies and lines to election booths. I mean, these are things that the Kremlin orchestrates very, very carefully. We've seen it done at home for a long time, and now this is the first time he's moved beyond his borders to do it there. So this is a very controlled campaign. It's a theater.
James Kirchick, welcome back to the show, and thanks for joining us again. And Miriam Elder, thank you very much for joining us again.
Thanks.
Coming up.